It's an election year, so on top of everything else people are arguing about, many are asking themselves, am I paying too much tax?
In the last 4 years, 5 chancellors have said they want to cut taxes. In reality, the opposite has happened. Taxes have been rising to near historic highs.
But have you ever wondered who is paying the most tax? And whether this year they're paying more or maybe less? You're listening to Stories of Our Times from The Times and The Sunday Times. I'm Luke Jones. Today, the Sunday Times tax list. Inside the tax bills of the super rich.
My name's Robert Watts. I'm the compiler of the Sunday Times tax list and the Sunday Times rich list.
What do wealthy people say when you invariably meet them and you introduce yourself with that?
It's a real mix. I mean, some of these people think what we do is incredibly nosy, that it's a gross invasion of their privacy. Some of them consider being on the Sunday Times rich list or tax list to be a badge of honour, something that they're proud of. It's something they feel shows that they've achieved a lot, and they kind of want that acknowledgement. It's strangely similar to the honours system for these people.
And how do you go about compiling the tax list? Let's talk about that because that's what we're discussing today. How do you go about actually finding the information for that?
The tax list measures the tax paid by high net worth individuals, business owners, celebrities. And this year we've looked at 100 people and ranked them on their contribution to the public finances. I wish I could say I spend my life sort of jumping from super yacht to super yacht. It ain't quite like that, I'm afraid. This is a very measured tread through company accounts that pop up, every few days. Another one will pop up at Companies House for me to work my way through and trawl through. But there are a lot of people who cooperate with us, both on the Sunday Times tax list and the rich list as well. And that cooperation can be extraordinary. I didn't expect that some of the people on this list would send me their tax returns when we started this word 6 years ago. There's a lot of chat, and probably more of it actually before we started putting these lists together, that the super rich don't pay any tax. And some of these people felt pretty sore about that. And so I found they probably actually want to cooperate with us more when it comes to the tax list, in fact, than they do the rich list, which has been going much, much longer.
And when you say tax, what do you mean for the purposes of this list? I mean, are you just going by the personal taxes that people pay and that would come up on their self-assessment tax return that they might send to you or not? I mean, what are you including in that?
Luke, it's a real spread, to be honest, but the core of it is personal and business taxation. Personal taxation is very hard to identify. Usually we find salaries disclosed to named individuals in company accounts. And if we can see that and we've got a name attached to it, we can be confident. We know this person is a resident here for tax purposes. Then we will count the income tax and employees' national insurance that they pay. And then we also count taxes paid by their businesses. So if you've got someone who owns all of the business, then we will count all of that business's corporation tax, all of that business's employers' national insurance, and then other taxes that business might pay as well. And some companies are going to the nth degree now in terms of disclosing not just the corporation tax, which they have to disclose, not just employers' NI, but they also disclose stamp duty, business rates, alcohol duty, gambling duty, things like that.
So if I own Luke Jones Limited in its entirety and that business is paying corporation tax, it's employing people and paying national insurance on those employees. It owns premises and I've had to pay taxes to buy those premises. If I have to pay, say I sell booze and there's sort of alcohol duty included in there, all of that gets wrapped up into the fantasy entry for Luke Jones.
Maybe we should have a conversation later. Yes, now we would do. Now, some people challenge us on that and they say, well, hang on, that's these businesses, their businesses rather than their actual tax. Well, yes, but often these people, they're the owners, they have the ability to move that business, if they so wish, offshore to a different country. But these people are choosing to keep that operation here, generate jobs. So it has to be the tax paid by business.
And this is arguably, I guess, why the why the tax list is more interesting than the rich list on some level, isn't it? Because I could appear on the rich list if I just own a £200 million country estate and just live in it all day. Whereas the tax list actually shows up the people generating wealth year by year, doing something.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And this boils to the heart of it. And I think why readers are so very interested in it. And we know that they do like comparing who's on the tax list, but very low down on the rich list, who's on the rich list, and yet mysteriously they think not on the tax list. Now, there can be, very plausible reasons why someone will be high up on the rich list, but not feature on the tax list. A billionaire, say the Hindujas, would be a very, very good example, who have lived in the UK for a long time, but their businesses are largely based overseas, in India and elsewhere in Asia. They've got a lot of businesses paying a lot of tax, but they're just not paying it here. And that's got us into some quite interesting debates around just scrutinising, that claim that we've all heard many times, haven't we, that it's in Britain's best interests for us to become this playground for the world's super rich, and that these people, when they come here, they bring their wallets and they spend a lot of money, and they also set up and create businesses. That's not always the case, to be honest. There's another aspect which is also true. We can only look at identifiable tax that we can see. Now, some people, as I've mentioned, that they come to us and they show us their tax returns and they want it to be known that they are paying tax. But some people, we simply cannot be confident that they are paying large amounts of tax, so we leave them out on that basis.
It's very interesting, all the ins and outs and how you compile it, but shall we cut to the chase? Because people want to know who is at the top, Robert. Who is at the top of your list?
Alex Gerko.
Third story, though, is basically about a guy who uses algorithms and like one sales guy and one trader to make people money.
Right. This is a really fun story. It tracks Alex Gerko. So he founded what's called XTX. They're a market maker out in London, founded in 2015. Revenue quadrupled from 2015 to 2018.
This intriguing Russian for the second year at the top of the tax list, and I've called him a Russian, and he may not be very happy about me using that word, because he has in fact renounced his Russian citizenship. He is no fan of Vladimir Putin. He's been an arch critic of the invasion of Ukraine, has in fact thrown more than £20 million at Ukraine since the invasion. He is a brilliant mathematician who's built this financial trading outfit called XTX, and he has contributed through corporation tax and through wait for it, £1.2 billion dividend, one of the biggest payments.
That he paid himself?
Yeah, so XTX, which
Good
he
on
owns 75%. Yeah, it's not a bad year's work, is it?
Yeah.
He owns, that we're aware of, 75% of XTX, and the total payment for that year was 1.6 billion. So he's cut 1.2 billion. And yeah, full UK tax on that payment, plus the corporation tax from XTX itself. So he's an intriguing figure, has quite a sort of rock star following in the slightly arcane world of algorithmic trading. He was very punchy on Twitter until recently deleting his account.
Punch in what way?
I mean, he's called out, attacked Sergei Lavrov soon after the invasion of Ukraine and said, Nuremberg is waiting for you.
He's the Russian foreign minister. Gosh. Remind me, Robert, what did his tax bill shake down then to for the last tax year, or the tax year of this list?
£664.5 million we were able to identify, which is the highest that we've ever had this is our 6th edition. By no means were we certain that he'd be number one, because there was a rather extraordinary number two who was very close, a reluctant number two.
And what a difference between the two of them, because Alex Gerko is 44 years old. Number two on the list is 93 years old. And yeah, reluctantly on that list. Explain who and why.
Born almost half a century apart. Yeah. Bernie Ecclestone. What on earth is Bernie Ecclestone doing at near the top of the tax list?
Former Formula One boss Bernie Ecclestone has pleaded guilty to fraud after failing to declare more than £400 million of overseas assets.
All relates to a meeting that he had with HMRC back in 2015 when Ecclestone declared that he only had a single trust fund set up to benefit his daughters and answered a direct no to the question, were there any other trusts either in the UK or overseas?
Well, last year he made a settlement to HMRC ahead of court, largely to escape jail. An investigation running back over 18 tax years involving a trust where he'd initially said that he wasn't involved with, but actually had received much of his winnings from decades of earning well from turning Formula One into a big box office sport. I had a brief, somewhat surreal conversation with Mr. Ecclestone.
Oh, so he engaged with you then?
It was an extraordinary conversation. I mean, those who've read the court reports surrounding that case last October will remember that one of the reasons his barrister suggested he should escape prison was that he was rather frail. But he told me that he was as fit and well as he'd ever been, and rather enjoying being a father to a 3.5-year-old. So Mr. Ecclestone's suggestion was that he had made an honest mistake, that when he'd been asked by the taxman, are you the beneficiary of any trust? He had said no, because he wasn't, he says, aware that an advisor acting on his behalf had set up a trust. I think it's an argument which not everyone listening to this podcast will necessarily give as much credit as he would like us to.
And so his total bill then, what?
£652.6 million that we can see, that we're confident of, but he was certainly keen to suggest that it was a higher number. So frustratingly, there was only so much information that we were able to get out of him about that.
And how much of all of that is down to this enormous settlement? I mean, how much of that is normal earnings?
All of that was this settlement, and that settlement was not just tax. That was a very large fine, and then interest stretching back 18 years as well.
Yes. Robert Watts, who compiles the Sunday Times Rich List and the Tax List, which is out now, is taking us through that list. And Robert, I mentioned just before that actually a lot of the people on the list this year are paying less tax than they did last year. To what extent, and why is that?
A lot of people will be listening to that and think, oh, it's because of all these, these clever tax avoidance people who are helping these rich people set up structures offshore. To be honest, that's not really the story that we found. We found a lot of these people's companies were struggling during our sort of time period, which is 22-23. Most of these numbers relate to that financial year when the economy wasn't not exactly going full blast, and so profits were lower, and corporation tax is levied on profits, and as a result, lower corporation tax bills. Also, there's an interesting thing about dividends as well, which is that the government raised the amount of tax that is levied on dividends, these payments that companies pay shareholders. Now, a few of the experts we spoke to while compiling the tax list took the view that was probably because that some businesses owners were paying themselves bumper dividends the year before the tax went up, and then when the year that we were looking at, 22-23, they paid themselves lower dividends because they'd be charged a higher rate of tax on it, which is quite interesting. So we think there's a bit of that as well. There are a few cases of these people setting up new parent companies in the Channel Islands or elsewhere, but they're pretty few and far between. We're talking about 100 people on the tax list this year, and the vast majority of them, we can see, UK-based companies.
Interesting, though, that even though, as I mentioned, lots of people are paying less tax in this list than the list before, there are two interesting ones actually bucking the trend and paying more tax than they were in the past.
I imagine you might be talking about Ed Sheeran and JK Rowling.
Yes, famous high earners.
I mean, Ed Sheeran, he is, that tour of his over the last year, the mathematics tour, but the numbers from that were astonishing.
Hello, everyone. So I'm happy to be announcing some new dates for the mathematics tour for the whole of 2024. We're going to start the year in Asia, and then throughout the summer, we're going to be in Europe. So
the payment we can see from his touring company for the first half of that tour, his personal payment was £62 million.
Lovely.
There was another £18.5 million from another company that receives his earnings from recording and writing music.
Gosh, it's really clear then when people say the big money to be made in music these days is actually in the touring, not in the having people listen to it at home. Gosh, that's a clear illustration of that, isn't it?
You're absolutely bang on there. I mean, yeah, it's a money-making machine, largely fueled by that great touring schedule. The box office takings per gig were something like 40% higher than they were on the previous tour from sort of 2017, 2019. He's very, very straight and very, very clear and straight in how he reports his finances, which is not true of all musical acts like that at all.
Well, he clearly hasn't spent it on clothes. But as you say, but he's been quite straightforward with it, as you said, as has, I think, JK Rowling. What was the final bill for both of those, so we can put them in the context of the sort of Ecclestone fine and back payments, and Alex Gurko, who you mentioned earlier, he was 600-something million.
For Ed Sheeran, 39.6 million. But we can identify for JK Rowling, bang on 40 million.
And going through this entire list, as you have been doing, what do you think this tells us about all the different things that have moved in this?
I think there are two things that I think are really valuable from it. Is that this is a time, bear in mind the timing of this, that we are talking about a moment where our public finances are pretty stretched. We're going into an election cycle, and we have a Chancellor of the Exchequer who's talking in terms of the mood for tax cuts. And yet we're seeing some of the wealthiest people in our country seemingly paying less tax. So I think this does provide food for thought on that. It's quite interesting. If you look at the comments from the people on the tax list, some of them, use it in reacting to it. Take someone like Sir Tim Martin, the Wetherspoons founder. He's very much of the view that this demonstrates actually that the tax burden is too much, that businesses are paying too much tax, that 40% of a pint now goes to the Exchequer. As we find with the rich list, there will be people who take different things from these lists, and some will look at these people and will think, wow, 9 people on this list contributed more than £100 million in a year to the public finances. Wow, these people deserve praise and possibly a gong for that. And there will be people who look at the list come from a different perspective and say, okay, that's interesting, but where are all the missing in actions people? Why aren't a lot of these foreign hedge fund managers here? Why aren't there people from private equity here? Why aren't there, more tech billionaires?
Because it's your view that the government has said for a while that successive governments have said that they've tightened up the system, that there are fewer loopholes and further gaps for people to escape paying their full fair share. Having had your head in all of this for so many years, do you think that actually there are still gaping wide loopholes that people make the most of?
I do know for a fact that HMRC are busy. I was talking to someone who is called in by the super rich to help with heavy-duty tax investigations. When a billionaire is being investigated, they call this guy. And he said for 3 years, pretty much 3 years during the pandemic, when there was a lot of working at home, the activity from tax inspectors targeting the super rich had really quietened down. And there was an interesting little wrinkle with this, which was that to investigate one of these people, you need to have access to the files. But if you couldn't take them out of the department, so if you're working from home, you couldn't do your job. But anyway, what this person said, and I've had it corroborated by another of these advisors, is that has changed in the last 6 months, and that HMRC has significantly increased their activity on targeting high net worth individuals in the last 6 months. It's like they both use the same phrase, actually. It's like they're waking up again. And another, they both referenced this new facility or newish facility that HMRC has got where people can go online and make disclosures. They also reference the Pandora Papers and the Panama Papers, these big leaks of financial data from tax havens, and that HMRC investigators have been combing through that data and then approaching UK people, UK residents when they pop up, and trying to nudge them, it's called, into a disclosure, sending these nudge letters saying, is there anything you'd like to tell us, and have a conversation. So I think, yes, there will. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is more tax to be collected out there, and there's no doubt about it. HMRC seems to be going a little bit harder at these people.
Fascinating stuff, Robert. Have you filed your tax return? Got less than a week if you haven't. Are you up or down on last year?
I know I'm paying more fees to my accountant because I don't trust myself to do it. I'd rather pay a professional to do it properly, and she's brilliant.
As are you. Thank you for being our accountant. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Luke.
You've been listening to Stories of Our Times, a podcast brought to you thanks to subscribers of The Times and The Sunday Times. With me, Luke Jones, and my guest, Rob Watts from The Sunday Times, the man behind the tax list. We have but scratched the surface of this list. As Robert said, there's 100 deep pockets he's been rooting through, so go to thetimes.co.uk and fill your boots with the full list. And while you're at it, you can see the most up-to-date, most recent rich list as well. The producer today was Priyanka Deladia. The executive producer is Kate Ford, and sound design was by Maula Seto. If you've enjoyed this episode, leave us a review. A glowing one will help other people find us. You can also contact us anytime. Stories of Our Times at thetimes.co.uk is how to reach us. Thanks for listening. Have a good weekend.